I want to talk to you about technology. This is my statement. Escalation of addictive behavior is and always has been driven by technology. I want to justify this. You know, once upon a time they had cave drawings that looked like porn. Naked men, naked women. How many people do you think were addicted to cave porn? Once upon a time, if you wanted sugar, you had to chew on a kind of stalk. You know, and you could chew it for hours and chew the sugar out while you were working so you would have energy to work. How many people were addicted to sugar and food, sugar-related foods, when you had, the only way to get sugar was unrefined, right? When they had cocoa leaves that people would chew because they were picking or working, you know, and it would give them extra energy like a cup of coffee, how many people were addicted to cocoa leaves, you know? But refined sugar, refined cocaine, online porn, gambling casinos, what has happened is that our culture, in its pursuit of more, and humanity's interest in looking for that thing over the next hill, which is a great part of being human, we've also magnified anything that can offer us pleasure. We've magnified sexuality, we've magnified food, we've magnified drugs, we've magnified gambling, we've magnified, and you know, guess what? We have more problems with people. We have more people with problems with these issues. But it is the technology that has driven these things forward, because it's the technology that has made them more refined, more intense, more powerful. And just as a little aside, I just like saying this, you know, back in the day, I remember so clearly, you know, I would go into a Texaco station and to pay for my gas, or my parents would, right? And what was in the Texaco station? Tires, oil, windshield wipers, maybe gum. Go to a gas station now and go inside to pay for your gas, and what's in there? There's food everywhere. Sugar, you know, refined wheat, tons of, I mean, the culture has made it convenient, and guess what those stores are called? Convenience stores, to have a tremendous access to very potentially addictive, pleasurable experiences and substances, not only drugs. And the problem is that some people can't handle that. Some of us are not able to manage, and a lot of us actually aren't able to manage that second chocolate chip cookie, but and I hate, by the way, walking. I go to hotels, really nice hotels, and they, you know, I come in and I'm tired, and I have my bags, and I've been traveling, and I do a lot of speaking stuff. And you know, the really nice ones, they give you a nice warm chocolate chip cookie when you walk in the door, and I don't want that, you know. But it's really hard to turn down when I walk. Anyway, that's my problem. So, why does technological advance lead to behavioral escalation? Why does the advance of technology lead to escalation in problem behaviors and addictive behaviors? Well, a few things for you here. Increasing access, like walking into that gas station, having all that food in front of you, means it's harder, you have fewer inhibitors to impulsive behaviors. You know, if I had to drive to the grocery store to get, from the gas station to the grocery store to get that soda and that, you know, and I couldn't just buy a soda back in the day, right? You had to buy a six-pack. So I had to go to the grocery store to buy a six-pack of soda and a box of candy bar, you know. I probably wouldn't have done it. But since I can pay for my gas, you get my point. It's access. And in my area of treatment, you know, if I want to look at porn today, what do? I pick up my phone. What did I do 20 years ago? I got in my car on the subway. I had to get dressed. I had to go down to the bad part of town. Where they had the icky place with the sticky floor, you know, and buy my porn, and it was expensive, and I hope nobody saw me there. And think of all the inhibitors that are in the way, all those precious moments that addicts, we pray for addicts, where they will say, maybe that's not something I want to do. Well, all that's gone. That's the problem, is that those moments where you might think, I don't know if I have time, or that might take, I don't know if I want to be seen there, or maybe I don't want to have that second helping, or that's all gone because it's all right in front of us. It's so easy, it's so available. And so there are fewer inhibitors which support more impulsivity, compulsivity, and addiction. It's just so easy to get, to find, to have, to use, whatever it is, and it's faster. Increasing, and in terms of sex in particular, increasing accessibility to sexual content and sexual experiences through phones, through pads, etc., means that sexually acting out is also easier to hide. So what are sex addicts out there doing? Well, that much hasn't changed. They're using porn, with or without masturbation. And I say that's important because I will work with men and women who will look at porn for 2 or 3 hours and then turn off the computer, but they don't masturbate and they don't orgasm. So what is sex addiction about, for example, if orgasm and sex itself is not the goal? And that's part of what I want to talk about. They anonymously hook up with people they meet online. More and more people are anonymously hooking up online. They're going to adult bookstores and strip clubs. Sex addicts are always cruising, they're intriguing, they're objectifying, they're working it. You know, if I was an active sex addict today, it would always be running in the back of my head, just like a drug addict. You know, drug addict goes to a party and he doesn't have any drugs on him, and what is he going to do? He's going to say, "Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. What are you doing here? Who do you know? Do you know the host? Do you like to party? Oh, okay, fine." And then he's going to move down the line until he finds a person who says, "Oh, I've got some drugs. Let's go out back." You know, because that's the obsession of the person who wants to use. You know, it's not necessarily on their face, but it's running back there all the time. And for sex addicts, it's always about who can I flirt with, whose card can I get. So that's always, whether it happens or not, there's a preoccupation and an obsession with the idea of it. Sex addicts push boundaries. They view no as a challenge. They have multiple affairs. They live a double life where they compartmentalize, you know, like any addict, they compartmentalize that part of the life and they live their double life. One of the things I love about working with sex addicts, by the way, which is different than those of you who work with drug addicts and alcoholics, is that my clients aren't pickled when they enter treatment. You know, their brains are very clear. They're hyper aware. They've been living a double life. They've been living two lives, you know, so they're really present from the moment they get there in their intellectually. The rest of them, but intellectually they're present, you know, so I don't have to wait 2 weeks for their brain to clear from their alcohol-induced, drug-induced. For the most part, they come in, you know, with a lot of sobriety. So that makes it a lot easier to work with them. So now I want to explain to you how it is that sex can be an addiction, because I think this is a very good jumping off place. Now, I have to give you a story. So way back when, I used to work with cocaine addicts. And I worked with a guy who was a binge cocaine user, and he would use on Thursdays, he would use on Fridays. He would get paid on Fridays. So on Thursday night, he'd be thinking, ooh, you know what, I get paid tomorrow. Maybe I could get some really good drugs. And wow, you know, I better call my dealer. So he'd call the dealer, and the dealer would say, oh man, I've got some great drugs for you. You got to come by tomorrow. You know, it's going to be awesome, you know. And so he would spend half the night in fantasy about how exciting it was going to be to go there and use, and then he'd go to work in the morning, and he'd say to his boss, oh, I'm just, you know, not feeling good. I need to get that check and get out of here. Man, I don't want to get sick. And so he'd get his check, and on the way to the bank, he'd call his girlfriend and say, I'm not going to be home tonight. My boss is going to keep me really late. So in typical addict fashion, you know, he would clear the time, and he would drive down to the dealer's house, cash in hand, on the way to use cocaine, and all he would be thinking about is how hot it was going to be when he got there. You know what? The dealer might give him some for free, and maybe there'd be other drugs, and he was thinking about what happened last time he was there, and then what's going to happen next, you know. So he gets there, and he knocks on the dealer's door, and the dealer opens the door, and he can smell the drugs. People are getting high. The dealer says, man, you know, I like you so much, I'm going to give you some dope, and you don't even need to pay for it. So he sits the guy down on a couch, and he puts a pipe in his hand, and he lights it, and the guy inhales. And that's what? Friday afternoon. So at what point in the scenario that I've described from Thursday afternoon to Friday afternoon is this man high? At what point is his thinking impaired? At what point is he making poor decisions for himself? At what point is he in an arousal state that's different than his day-to-day? At what point? Oh, come on now. Really? But he hasn't put any drugs into his system. So this is the dilemma of the of Western culture with addiction, is that we have gotten to the point, and this includes most of the psychiatrists out there, unfortunately, we're working on that. It makes sense that you could get addicted to nicotine or some drug that your body begins to acclimate to and become comfortable with, and then when you start to remove yourself from the use of that drug, you crave it, you go into withdrawal symptoms, all that kind of stuff. So there is an understanding, I think, both in the clinical community and our culture of what drug addiction is and alcoholism, because you can see it, you can slam it, you can snort it, you can drink it, that makes sense. But how could you be addicted to a behavior? How could you be addicted to gambling? Or how could you be addicted to sexual behavior? You haven't put anything into your body. You haven't had anything to drink or use that would alter your neurochemistry. And yet, what I would say to you is if you were in the car with that guy driving downtown to the dealer's house, or if I was in the car, what would his hands feel like? They'd be clammy, and his heart would be beating faster, and his pupils would be dilated, and his hearing would be more acute, and he'd be breathing more shallowly. And in addition to that, his intellectual functioning, and this is the most important part, would be reduced. So he is in a different state of consciousness than, well, let me ask you this. When do you, those of you who treat addicts, the cocaine addict I talked about, when do you think would be the best time to try to get him to not use in that scenario I talked about from Thursday night to Friday? Wednesday. Thank you very much. And I would agree with you. That's a very good addiction therapist, because you know that we got to teach this guy. And we don't teach him. Now, just remember, be careful. Thursday night's difficult for you, because that doesn't work. You know, just say no, sorry, doesn't work. So, but what does work is you say to him, on Wednesday afternoon, as a therapist, I want you to call me, I want you to tell me what your plans are for Friday night, for Saturday morning, for Saturday afternoon. I want to know who you're going to spend time with, what you're going to be doing. I want it all scheduled. So in other words, you anticipate the problem, basic relapse prevention, and you know, even though he may be dying to go to the dealer's house, he's got plans with his sponsor, he's got a meeting to go to, you know, all that stuff. So, you are anticipating that when he gets into, the closer he gets to that desired object, the drugs, the less able he's going to be able to make good decisions for himself. And that's how we think about relapse prevention treatment for drug addicts and alcoholics. So when I think about sex addiction, I think about the guy who is driving around the block in the red light district for 3 hours looking for the right prostitute, or the person who's looking at porn for a couple of hours, you know, and all of that stuff. I think of things like increased heart rate, pupils dilated, hearing more acute, shallow breathing, sweating, and perspiration, a feeling of rush or intensity or excitement about what I'm going to go do now, and most of all, reduced intellectual functioning, and that is the key piece to the whole 9 yards. Now, do you have any natural disasters here in Dallas? I need to ask that, because I can talk about, I give this lecture in California, it's easy to say we have earthquakes. So do you guys have any natural hurricanes or tornadoes? Tornadoes, great, tornadoes, groovy. So I hope you don't have one. But let's say, just for the sake of saying it, that we had a window in this room, and you saw that there were big thunderstorms, and you heard the building shake, and it was raining, and all of a sudden the sky turned green, and all the lights went out, and there was a big alarm that went off. My guess is you wouldn't be thinking, God, how long is this guy going to talk, and am I going to get a break soon because I have to go to the bathroom? Or, you know, probably you'd be thinking one thing and one thing only. Save my, or, you know, where are my kids? Are they going to be okay? Or something, you know, everything else would go out of your head. It's fight or flight, right? And so what I'm saying to you is that when we have an intense release of adrenaline, which is part of what happens in anticipatory fantasy, part of what happens is it becomes, and Jackson talked a lot about this, is it becomes much more difficult for us to make good intellectual decisions. The part of our brain, our prefrontal lobe, that is the abstracting part that says, I'm not sure that's such a good idea, we are less able to access that when we are in an extremely aroused emotional state. And just like that person who is standing on the, well, and you know where this comes from, right? And by the way, I have to say this word, evolution. Okay, I've said it. Now, I don't have any problem saying that on one coast or another, but when I'm in the middle of the country, I have to be careful about saying that word, but I'm going to say the word evolution. So, you know, my guess is that that our ancestors, you know, it kind of went like this. The one who walked out of a cave, or, you know, or walked out of a cave, and looked and saw a big tiger with stripes and said, what a pretty tiger. I love the orange stripes. That's really pretty. Guess what happened to him? He didn't make it. Now, the guy who walked out of the cave saw the tiger, and the next thing he knew, he was up a tree. But he never knew he could climb a tree. He doesn't even remember how he got up there. Those are our ancestors. It's those of us who were able to shut down our thinking brains, be in the crisis or in a moment of extreme arousal, and just take the action because our decision-making is coming from a much more primitive part of our brainstem. So what initiates this rush of neurochemistry is fantasy. You know, just like the drug addict who's thinking, I can't wait to use, I can't wait to get high, I can't wait to get to that house, he has euphoric recall, what it was like last time I was there. You know, he has anticipatory fantasy, what it's going to be like later after I'm high. You know, he's everywhere but present. And his heart is pounding and his pupils are dying. He's in that state of hyperarousal. But there's a little bit of an addition to that because he's not only has adrenaline release, he also has dopamine release. Dopamine release gives us pleasure. That gives what that feeling is when you have cultivated a rose bush from being this big at Home Depot to now it's flowering in your garden and glistening with little roses, and you walk over and they smell beautiful and you feel like, wow, that's lovely, I did that. That's dopamine. Now, if you go snort a gram of cocaine, you're going to feel like, oh my God, that's great. That's a lot of dopamine, okay? It's the same drug, it's just a different, same hormone, it's just a different amount of release. So the guy that I'm working with, or woman who's thinking about the hot sexual experience they have, and they're going to hook up, and the person is going to be so great, they're not thinking about their wife or their husband, they're not thinking about the things, their kids or where they should be. All they're thinking about, it's tunnel vision. I can't wait to get there and do that thing. And maybe somewhere in the back of their head they might hear, well, my therapist said, or my sponsor said, or my spouse said, but that's all like way in the background, because what they're really focused on is I cannot wait to get to that experience, and everything else becomes unimportant. And it is because of the neurochemistry. And if you look at it this way, you understand that that process addictions are very much the same as drug addiction. In the sense that the people that I work with spend a lot of time planning, looking for, searching, hunting. And why do drug addicts not just say, oh, well, this is bad for me, I shouldn't be doing it, and stop? It's because when they go into the state of arousal and fantasy about using, and they start to rhapsodize, is that a word? They start to get excited about their using days, and that's why we don't tell war stories in meetings, because we don't want to trigger people, all that stuff. Because once that ball starts rolling downhill, it's harder and harder to stop. And so when I look at sex addiction, I think about people who spend a lot of time in this state of intense arousal, and I don't mean genital arousal, I mean emotional arousal. Because if sex addiction were really about sex, I don't know about you, well, I don't want to know about you as a matter of fact, but most of us could probably have a sexual experience with the right stimulation in 10 minutes, maybe 15, to orgasm. If we had a lot of amount of time and we had the right stimulation, but the people I work with will spend a week obsessing, thinking about, planning, going here, getting this, doing, and why is it? Well, because, do you have any arts papers here in Dallas? Like, I have the LA Weekly, the Village Voices in New York. Do you have any of those, papers kind of liberal? They show you the movies, but they also show you the opera. And do you have one of those? Thank you for nodding. There's the only Democrat in the room? That's the only political thing I'm going to say all day. What is the paper called? The Voice? The Observer. Okay. And what's in the back of the Observer? Classifieds. And what's in those classifieds? Massage and escort ads. Okay? So this is what my clients do. My clients, I'll say to a client, like, you don't get to have the Observer at your house anymore. And let's say, what do you mean, where am I going to get my movie reviews? And I'm going to say to them, well, when did you ever read the Observer from the front? And here's how it works. I am sitting in my office, I'm a sex addict, and my spouse calls and says, I'm going to be home late. Could you make dinner and I'll see you later? And so I think to myself, I got a couple of free hours here. So I'm in my office and I pick up the Observer and I think, well, I'm not, and this is how I think I'm not going to do this, but I just want to see what's in there. Addict thinking, right? So I open the back of the Observer and I start to see the dancers and the escorts and guess what happens? My heart starts to race a little bit, adrenaline. But not only that, I get this experience of pleasure, dopamine release. So now I'm excited and I'm feeling pleasure, and who doesn't want to feel more of that? So then I'm not really thinking as clearly as I was. So now I'll say something like, well, I'm not going to call anyone, but maybe I'll just go online, because some of these images will be clearer online and I can see them better, and then I'm online. And guess what? More adrenaline, more dopamine, more arousal, less ability to think clearly, more lost in the excitement of what I'm going to do. And then I'll say, well, but this person looks really good, and I've never talked, well, maybe I'll just call, and that's how it escalates, So I end up being 3 hours late going home because I've gone to see a prostitute when my plan was to come home early, as my spouse asked me to do. And by the way, I want to point out what the trigger was, abandonment. Just a thought for you, what the trigger is. And that's what my clients do. A little etiology really quickly. They don't feel they're feeling. They don't know what they're feeling. They feel, well, most people would say that, a lot of addicts know two feelings, anger and horny or something like that. And, my clients don't really realize that they're upset that their spouse is going to be home late, or they're angry that they're going to spend the evening alone, or they're going to miss the structure of their evening. What they go to is, ooh, I'm kind of horny, or oh, it would be hot, or ooh, look at this opportunity. That's what treatment's about in part. It's bringing them to an awareness of what was the trigger there. What left you going from a regular day at work to, well, my wife called. Well, what did she say? Well, she wasn't going to be home. Well, how did you feel about that? I don't know. I just thought I'd go see a prostitute. I was kind of horny. Well, but in between, wife not being home, horny, those things really aren't related. So how did you get, and when you start to look underneath, with some work, you realize that person can be very triggered by abandonment, by fear of being alone, whatever those issues are. So what do? They learn to self-soothe through fantasy, and they probably learned that pretty early on. So they start to use fantasy, and then they start to use objects, and then they start to use people who are objects to them to play all of this out, losing their ability as they go along to make good decisions, until it's over. And by the way, addicts the people I work with, they have a name for this state of consciousness. They call it being in the bubble. They call it being in the trance. They call it being spaced out. You might call it fight or flight or dissociative or trauma or self-soothing. It's probably all of those things. The 12-step people also have a term for this, a word for this state of consciousness. It's called powerless. It's that idea that, you know what, like for that drug addict I was talking about, Wednesday morning when I call my friend and I say I need to make plans for the weekend, I'm not that powerless. But the closer I get to the dealer's house, the less able I am to make good decisions for myself. That we actually can neurochemically and biologically look at what powerlessness is. And it is literally the ability that drains out of us as we get into intense arousal to make good decisions. And I become more driven toward that emotionally based decision rather than an intellectually based decision, which means I'm functioning out of a lower part of my brainstem. Not a bad thing if there's a tornado, not such a good thing if you want to go home to your family and you become fascinated by that affair partner that you saw last week. So this is my final sort of summation of the Sex Addiction 101 piece, is that I don't really think sex addiction is about sex. And I've been doing this work for 20 years. I really don't think so. I don't think it's about the sexual act, and I don't think it's about orgasm any more than compulsive gambling is about winning or losing. Because you can have a compulsive gambler who's hundreds of dollars down, and really needs that money for the rent and the kids' college fund, and he or she will be sitting there playing blackjack, and the chips go up and up and up. Any of you work with gamblers, and they're like, woo, I got all this money, I can pay off my bills, and then what happens? Well, inevitably, if you play long enough, the chips start to go down. But does the compulsive gambler say, ooh, I better get up from the table because I need this money and it's starting to go down? That's not what the compulsive gambler does. They will sit there and play until it's all gone. Because it's not about winning or losing for the compulsive gambler. It's about it's that hijacking, I don't like that word, of the human trait of what's over the next hill. What's over the, because the gambler's thinking, well, I may be losing now, but that next set of cards, and it's the same with the people I work with. They're thinking about, well, I can't wait to get to that. It's all about fantasy. So sex addiction is mostly about the desire for sex, the search for orgasm. It is a process addiction because it's about someone could spend a week looking for it and, 12 minutes having it. And that would be, and then you call it sex addiction, but the sex is really just this, And what are the process addictions? Well, I just threw them up here for you. So what do we got? Gambling, gaming, workaholism, religion, binge eating, sex, exercise, religion, spending, and high-risk behavior. Now, in and of themselves, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with any of these on some level. I mean, I can tell you there's a few Thanksgiving dinners where I might have done a little bit of binge eating, I have friends here in the audience, like my friend Charlie over there. She makes great stuffing. So, I might have, and that could be very pleasurable on occasion. Sex is a good thing. Exercise is a good thing. Belief and religion and feeling a part of. But there are people who will use these experiences to lose themselves, dissociate, and find a way to escape reality rather than just simply having the occasional pleasure or experience or connection. Most of these are connecting experiences. I don't know about the gambling, but work is, religion is, eating is, sex is. Actually, these can be very connecting. My clients use these in absence of any connection with others. So there are the process addictions. Now, I want to talk about etiology. How do you grow a sex addict? That's a laugh line, by the way. Well, you just plant them in a little bit of water and, okay. Well, you abuse them sexually at an early age, overtly or covertly. And by the way, among the women that we see in treatment, somewhere like close to 70% have overt sexual abuse in their histories. No wonder why they're so screwed up. So almost about 3/4 of the women have been overtly sexually abused in childhood. So they have a lived experience of having to use fantasy and control as a means of tolerating sexual experiences. I work with a guy who just bought a brand new BMW, and he goes downtown to the red light district to pick up a prostitute and her pimp at 3 in the morning. And we would all say, oh my God, that person's crazy. I mean, look what he's doing. He's risking his life, he's risking his health, he's risking arrest, all that stuff. But he would say, I feel like this is great. This is hot. This is, because he has learned that through the arousal and through the excitement, he doesn't have to worry about there's no fear-based. Now, ask him to go home and talk to his spouse intimately about what he's dealing with in his life and what he's going through, and that's very frightening to him. And I think that's a good example of the challenge that my clients deal with. If you think about, if I said to you that sex addiction is symptomatic of something, What it's symptomatic of is an intimacy disorder. What it's symptomatic of is an attachment disorder. What it's symptomatic of is really the inability to make use of intimate human relationships for healing and self-soothing, which, by the way, is, I think, a challenge many addicts have. You know, they'd rather eat dirt than ask for help. So you take someone and you offer them sexual abuse, or they have early attachment deficits, parenting deficits, or they, because of who they are, they have social anxiety or social avoidance, or they have early trauma or neglect or some forms of abuse, or they have parental enmeshment, narcissistic parenting. You know, these are recipes for how you raise a sex addict. When I think of my friend Bill Clinton, who I've never met, but I like saying that, because Bill's kind of everybody's friend, you know. So my friend, well, maybe not everybody. Now, politics, sorry, don't mean to go there. So, you know, if I walked out, and nobody laughs. Like, nobody even laughs about politics. Come on, you guys, laugh, 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 because I'm not giving you any political. But anyway, if you look, anybody do genograms? Remember those? They taught us in grad school. Do Bill Clinton's genogram. You know, alcoholic, abusive, abandoning father, depressed mother. This is a man who learned, and a brilliant child. So this is a man who learned really early on, in order to get his emotional needs met, what did he need to do? Who did he need to be for that woman? Who did he need to be? How could he parent his mother into parenting him? You know? And so what does a man or a woman learn in that situation? Well, you learn how to charm, how to entertain, how to read what other people need and be that for them. You may not, now, this is not a good thing to be learning when you're 4 or 5 years old. You know, the goal, kids have a job. Does everybody know what a kid's job is? It's one thing and one thing only. I love this expression. What is a child's job? It's to play. That's a child's job. And our job is to keep them safe and to attend to them and to attend to their play and engage. And anything that keeps a child from play and fantasy is interfering with their growth, in essence. And so when you have a child who is not consistently validated, supported, nurtured, and attended to for what's in here, but instead has to make that happen by creating a set of circumstances where the parent will attend to them and they will get their needs met, that's a child who's a survivor, not a child who's playing. And that is most of the men I work with. They learn very early on, what is it going to take to get these people? Well, Tiger Woods is a good example. You know, here's a kid who would have done anything for his dad's approval, and the only time he got approval was when he was performing. You know, no wonder why he learned to be such a good performer, but is so empty inside, you know, and he talks about that. So, narcissistic parenting, where the needs of the parent come first, is what I see mostly in the men. You know, I don't know if you ladies are aware of this, but our egos, especially when we're younger, they're not as strong as yours. And we will lose ourselves in order to get our emotional needs met from a parent, but that is an attachment deficit that we carry throughout life. Sometimes people will say to me, you know, Rob, you're a pretty good therapist, you know, and I am a reasonably good clinician. You know, when did you first start studying clinical psychotherapy? And I said, I was about 3, you know, because I have had a bipolar mother who was psychotic, who every 18 months went to the psych hospital. And in the 60s, you know, and 70s, when mom would run down the street naked or go after grandma with knives, you know, because she was psychotic, that was not your norm. And guess what? Nobody talked about it. So, you know, in fact, I don't think I learned my mother was mentally ill until I was 15. Although I lived with it my whole life, nobody ever talked about why mom went away every 18 months. But you know what I learned really early on? What's the message in my house? Make sure mom doesn't get upset. Don't upset mom. You know, well, you can't do that if you're a kid. You're gonna be upset about things. Things are gonna happen. And so, you know, in like fashion, I'll give you another example. I have a client who had a very depressed mother, endogenously depressed, and he would wake up in the morning and his mom would be in bed, and he'd come home at night and she'd still be there. You know, no one to make him breakfast, no one to make him, you know, he had to figure it out for himself. So this client, absolutely true, at 6 and 7 years old, would tell me that he would go to school and he would go in the mirror in the elementary school bathroom and he would practice smiling. He would practice smiling because he knew that if he came up with just the right smile, he could get his mom to wake up. You know, and that is the healthy narcissism of a young child who believes that they're the center of the universe and everything revolves around them as it should. Unfortunately, the unsuccessful resolution of early narcissism is shame, by the way. I don't have time to go into that. The successful resolution of early narcissism is self-esteem. You know, bad things can go bad, but I'm okay. Things can go good, and I'm okay. The unsuccessful resolution is lack of self-worth, self-esteem, problems with attachment, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm saying to you is that all of these things keep individuals from learning how to utilize basic intimacy, socialization, support to meet healthy dependency needs. That's really the problem, is that my clients would rather engage in an intensity-based experience than an intimacy-based experience. Now, why would you rather go to a prostitute than an intimate partner? Well, I'll tell you what, a prostitute's not going to reject you. A prostitute's always going to have time for you. A prostitute's never going to make you feel bad about your body or yourself, because that's their job. And so looking at porn, having intense affairs, engaging in multiple prostitution experiences, or even in more primitive ways, simply getting off to porn or to anonymous sexual experiences, all of that meet on some level a need to feel wanted, desired, important, special, all the things that we all want to feel, that we all need. But my clients either learn to or never learn to be able to turn to friends and people they love and depend on them to get their emotional needs met. And this isn't that hard to understand, If I'm having a really good day and I go to you and say, oh my God, this is a great thing happened to me, I'm hopeful that you're going to say to me, wow, good for you. And that makes me feel better. I could sit alone with my joy, but if I share it with you and you get excited and you mirror it back to me, if I say the boss is a witch, I can't stand her, knowing that that's a really bad thing to do because I'm probably going to come back to me. But if I say to you or a coworker, God, our boss, I really can't stand her, well, that's a stupid thing to do, but I'm doing it because I want you to say to me, you're right, she really is a witch, I can't stand her either, and that makes me feel better. There's something about sharing the outcome of our emotions, what underlies our emotions, and sharing our emotions in intimate relationships, independent relationships, that makes us feel better. And most of the people that I work with don't want to do that. They don't know how to do that. They don't even know what they're feeling most of the time. So what they do know is they're really horny, and it's really hot to go do this and this and this, and they keep doing it and keep doing it and doing it, and they feel terrible about themselves. And by the way, that also doesn't allow them to get what they really need anyway. And I'll give you an example of this. I had a client who described the following situation. I love this story. It so well exemplifies it. This was a gentleman with children at home, and his wife said, God, these wives, they never come home. His wife said, I'm going to take a yoga class tonight, and I'm going to be out late. Do you mind coming home early and taking care of the kids and make sure they get fed? And so he thought, I can get laid and come home, this is where, So he left work early, telling his boss that his wife asked him to come home, and he went and saw a prostitute or went to a massage parlor, whatever he did, and then he came home and, took a shower. His kids came home from school, and he took care of the kids and spent time with the kids and home with the kids. So when his wife came home, there he is, playing with the kids have been fed, he's entertaining them, they're having this relational experience, and his wife comes home and she just beams, and she says, honey, I am so proud of you, I love you so much, I love watching you with the kids, you're such a good father. And what do you think he does with that in his head? Feel free to call something out. He turns it around. Why? Because he knows where he's been that day, and he knows what he did that day. So in his head, and narcissism is a big part of the kinds of injuries that I deal with, he says, well, it's nice that she says that she loves me and that I'm so great with the kids, but if she knew where I was this morning, she wouldn't be saying those things to me. So the love that's available to him in his intimate relationships, he can't take in because of his adult behavior, and he has set it up, and it was set up long ago, that he doesn't trust or isn't able to allow, never learned how to allow it in growing up. And so he turns to intensity-based experiences, which, by the way, are like eating potato chips when you're hungry. They will, for the moment, make you feel better. But if you go home and all you have is potato chips, you're just going to get sicker and sicker and sicker, because what you really need is protein and nutrition. And that's my clients. They need deeply healing, intimate, real relationships with friends and partners. And what they do instead is they alienate and distance themselves from friends and partners, and then they go act out with a bunch of strangers, and they wonder why they feel so empty and desperate all the time. And it's simply because their emotional needs aren't being met. Now, we need 3 things to survive infancy and early toddlerhood. We need to eat, we need shelter, and we need love. Okay, now little babies don't know much about love. What they do know about is being coochie-cooed and being held and being played with and being attended to and, all that kind of stuff. Eventually, as you grow, for example, if I was feeling needful and wanting love right now, I would not want to be patted on the head or powdered or having you come up to me and say, coochie-coo, Rob, you're so cute, because my needs have evolved. As I've evolved, I'm not a child anymore. But I still have an emotional need for love. It comes in the form of feeling appreciated and valued and a part of and contributing to and all those human needs that we have. Now, how many of you no longer need to eat to survive? How many of you no longer need shelter to survive? So how many of you no longer need love? You see, I think we need all three of these things throughout the lifespan. And so what I think my clients are trying to do in essence is they're trying to evoke a feeling of being an experience where they feel like they're getting loved, appreciated, valued, all that stuff, but where they don't have to take any emotional risks. Because no prostitute can leave you feeling criticized, let down, rejected, those porn always has time for you. Porn is never too busy with the kids, or whatever that is. And so what my clients want most of all is an oxymoron. What my clients want is something that is not achievable. It's called controllable intimacy. And that is an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp or military intelligence. Two words that don't really go together. Because what is intimacy? Intimacy is an experience where you know all about me, I have no secrets from you, and you get to decide whether you want to love me or not, whether you want to be with me or not. I don't have control over how, and you know what, you might be too busy right now. And I might need to go get my needs met somewhere else from another friend. But what my clients do is they usually, if they're able to partner, they find one partner, they put all their needs on that person, they completely focus on them, and then when that partner completely abandons them by doing something really crazy, like having the child they've been talking about having, they feel abandoned, wounded, rejected, furious, and they start to devalue and blame and push that partner away and say, she's gained all this weight, he isn't as attentive to me, they're spending all this time with the kids, they're not with me, well, screw them, I deserve to be able to go do something over here because I'm not getting my needs met. And so what they do is they devalue and they dismiss and they push away the partner, and then they feel entitled to go act out. And that's how any kind of addictive behavior goes, right? Victim, entitled. Poor me, I deserve. And that's what my clients do. But what they deserve is more attention, more validation, more love, and they do it through porn and sex and intense relationships. So they're looking for controllable